The cameras caught nothing, yet something priceless is missing. Welcome to Sayers and Secrets. I am your host, Joe Maddox. Let me know which city or cafe you're solving this from today. Your comments make this mystery come alive. Thanks for being here. Let's dive in. It started, as these things often do, with a tap at the front door that managed to sound both timid and rehearsed. I was at my desk in the office, flicking through a copy of the latest auction listings from Montague's Monthly, an indulgence I allow myself between actual detective work and trying not to strangle Nero Wolfe during his afternoon orchid rotation. Fritz was in the kitchen doing divine things to a veal cutlet, and Wolfe himself was, as ever at 4:30 sharp, locked away with his phalaenopsis. When the doorbell rang, I glanced up and called out the usual, "Got it." I swung the door open and took in the man on the stoop, 30-ish, a dark tweed coat that had been expensively tailored for someone else, and a face with the kind of angular tension you only get from inheriting money you're not smart enough to keep. "Mr. Wolfe?" he asked, already stepping inside. "Nope," I said. "I'm Archie Goodwin. You're early for disappointment, but come on in." He offered a clammy handshake I politely ignored, and let me guide him to the office. I didn't need Wolfe to tell me that this guy was trouble. Not the dangerous kind, but the kind that smells, like old cigars, unpaid debts, and family lawsuits. "I'm Cedric Pope," he said once seated. "My grandfather Harold Pope passed last week. There's an item missing from his estate, a small jade box." "Jade box," I repeated, jotting it in my notepad for show. "Valuable?" "Monetarily, yes. Sentimentally, more. It held papers." He kept it in a locked desk drawer. "The solicitor swears it was there when the estate inventory began, but yesterday at the pre-auction preview it was missing." I leaned back. "And you didn't call the cops because—" He cleared his throat. "My grandfather collected things in a way that wasn't always above board. He ran the Belcroft auction house. A few pieces in the estate are of murky provenance. If I start crying theft, I may open the door to scrutiny. We don't want." "Ah," I said. "So to recap, an illegal collection is about to be auctioned off. Something fishy vanishes. And you came to the guy who charges by the syllable for interest. Bold." He flushed. "I thought Mr. Wolfe might discreetly determine who took it." I stood. "Discretion's expensive." "I can pay." That part was less of a surprise than you'd think. Men like Pope always think money can clean up rot if you throw it fast enough. I headed for the door to the plant rooms and knocked twice. After a beat, I cracked it open. "Yes?" Wolfe's voice, half sigh, half growl. "Client. Possible theft. Jade box, dead grandfather. Auction house angle." Pause. "I will hear him at 5. You will accept his details until then." I shut the door. That was as close to "I'm curious" as Wolfe got without charging a retainer. Back at the desk, Pope had taken to rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Is he always like that?" "Worse," I said, taking my chair. "Tell me everything you haven't told the cops, or anyone else." He did, or tried. Between the nervous hesitations, contradictory details, and suspicious overclarifications, I sketched out this much. Harold Pope died in his sleep, natural causes. The Belcroft auction house had planned a private liquidation of his personal collection. Cedric, now partial heir, spotted the jade box on day 1 of cataloguing, and again during the initial preview. On day 2 it was gone. No sign of forced entry. No clue from staff. "So you think one of your late granddad's trusted employees pulled a fast one before the gavel drops?" I said. "I suspect it," he admitted. "But I can't accuse without proof. There are complications." "Always." "List the suspects." He hesitated. "There's Ms. Tilda Renfrew, the long-time appraiser. She worked with my grandfather for 30 years. She had access to everything. Then there's Martin Hale, the young assistant manager. Bright, ambitious, but he was passed over in the will." "How tragic," I said dryly, "and I suppose you could add my Uncle Thaddeus. He resents the way things were divided. Thought he'd inherit more." I finished my notes. "All right, you've got yourself a maybe. If Wolfe takes the case, you'll need to bring in a full inventory list, auction schedule, staff bios, and a floor plan of Belcroft. I can do that. And Cedric," I added as he stood, "don't go tipping anyone off you hired a detective. Not even a big fat orchid-loving one." He gave a stiff nod and left. I waited until I heard the front door click shut and then counted to 10. Wolfe's voice came from the plant room. "Archie." "Yes, sir." "You may arrange dinner for 7. Invite Mr. Pope and have Fritz serve apricot-glazed duck. Expecting results already?" "I expect to observe," Wolfe said. "A man who lies while describing a theft may conceal more than absence." Which meant Wolfe was intrigued, and so of course was I. A jade box, a shady auction house, and a liar with too much money. Just the kind of mess we live for. At precisely 7 o'clock, Fritz unfurled his gastronomic sorcery across the dining table like it was a diplomatic summit. Apricot-glazed duck, seasoned with a hint of thyme and a whisper of star anise, rested beside roasted turnips and buttered leeks. The wine, a 98 Pommard, was decanted and breathing with all the sophistication of Wolfe's temper before I interrupted it. Cedric Pope arrived looking like a man who'd brushed his hair twice and confidence none. His overcoat was new and too stiff, which meant he'd either just bought it or borrowed it to look respectable. He handed Fritz a pair of kid gloves he didn't need to remove and followed me toward the dining room with the uncertain shuffle of someone entering a confessional booth made of velvet and polished wood. Wolfe was already seated, mountainous and immobile at the head of the table, eyes half closed like he'd only recently emerged from pondering the mortality of figs. He gave a tight nod as Cedric entered and gestured vaguely at the chair opposite. I took my spot at the right and waited for the game to begin. "Mr. Pope," Wolfe said, "you allege that an item of significance has vanished. You suggest it is theft, yet lack clarity on motive, opportunity, or objective. You're here to clarify." Cedric squirmed. "Yes, Mr. Wolfe, I suppose I am." The soup course, celery and fennel, was served as Wolfe delicately unfolded his napkin. "You may begin with what you omitted earlier. I assure you, Mr. Goodwin will notice if you stray again." Pope winced and adjusted his cufflinks. A flashy pair with little green stones I suspected were trying very hard to look like emeralds. "I didn't lie," he began. "Only withheld. A distinction without a difference," Wolfe muttered. "Proceed." He cleared his throat. "The jade box wasn't just an heirloom. It contained a packet of letters. Personal correspondence between my grandfather and a woman named Mrs. Ivy Rainsford." "Name sounds expensive," I said. "She was married, wealthy, well-connected. The letters suggest they had a long affair." Wolfe frowned, not from surprise, but from the quality of the confession. "And you believe the theft of the jade box is motivated by those letters?" "I do," Cedric said. "Or rather, I suspect. Someone with knowledge of their existence would have motive to keep them buried. Yet you stated earlier you saw the box during the preview. Surely it wasn't opened for the public." "No, it was displayed but locked shut. A clerk named Loretta placed it behind a glass cabinet. That's why I assumed it safe, until the next day when it was gone." Wolfe waved his fork slightly. "And you've spoken of this only to us?" "I confided in Ms. Renfrew, the appraiser. She was very close to my grandfather. Trusted her implicitly." "Idiot," Wolfe said flatly. Cedric blinked. "Excuse me?" Wolfe sighed. "Trust is the crutch of the inept. Mr. Goodwin, question him." I did. Over the next hour, we chewed our duck and the truth at roughly the same speed. Yes, Pope had reason to suspect Hale, the young assistant manager. His Uncle Thaddeus had hinted Hale knew of the affair. No, the will did not explicitly reference the jade box or its contents. Yes, Tilda Renfrew handled all estate appraisals, cataloguing and arrangements for the auction. Yes, Thaddeus had challenged the estate division through a lawyer but had yet to act publicly. No, the auction date had not changed. And yes, he had considered retrieving the box himself until it vanished. I took it all in, though it didn't sit well. The whole thing had the pungent tang of manipulation. Too many yes buts and I suppose so's. Wolfe said nothing as dessert arrived, hazelnut taut with dark cherries, because Fritz believes heaven is made of layers. After coffee, Wolfe finally leaned back and fixed Cedric with a gaze. That could reduce Marple to talc. You are concealing something yet, he said, not out of guilt but calculation. Cedric stiffened. I don't think that's fair. It is not meant to be. It is merely accurate. Wolfe closed his eyes. You will deliver to Mr. Goodwin the following: a complete catalogue of auction items, all personnel files available to you from Belcroft, and a floor plan of the auction house including restricted areas. You will do this tomorrow morning. You will inform no one. You will also bring the auction's insurance documents and estate inventory logs. Am I clear? Cedric nodded. Yes, absolutely, first thing. Good, leave us. I showed him out without ceremony. He offered me a handshake again. I offered him the doorknob. Back in the office, I dropped into my chair with a sigh. Wolfe was already back, in his as if he hadn't moved, thought or tasted a thing all evening. Well? I asked. He's lying, Wolfe said. That much I got. About what? About the purpose of the jade box, the nature of its value, and his own intentions. I suspect the letters are genuine, but their contents, those are the real currency. Blackmail? No. Leverage, I whistled, which means the thief isn't protecting Ivy Rainsford. Indeed, they're suppressing Cedric Pope. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Tomorrow, you will go to Belcroft. Speak with Miss Renfrew and Mr. Hale. Do not inform them of our inquiry. Ask about the box, its value, and observe their reactions. And Archie, yes? Be ruthless with charm. The corners of my mouth tugged. Always am. As I reached for my coat, Fritz entered to clear the dishes, his expression neutral. Wolfe, who rarely addresses Fritz directly in matters of detection, turned his head. Fritz, do we have any jade in the house? Fritz blinked. A paperweight. Burmese. On your bookcase. Wolfe nodded. Tomorrow, place it on my desk. I wish to contemplate jade. Which meant in Wolfe's language, I want to consider what kind of man steals something for silence. And if he was already pondering it, the thief had better be worried. The next morning I woke early, showered, shaved, and pulled on my best. Charm with questions suit. A soft grey number with lapels that didn't scream detective, but whispered civil servant with an expense account. I told Fritz to keep lunch warm, which earned me a sniff of disdain, and was out the door by 9:15, headed downtown toward the Belcroft auction house. The place sat on a corner of East 68th and Madison, behind a carved limestone facade that screamed old money with better secrets. The exterior gave nothing away. Frosted windows, a brass plaque, and the kind of understated signage that tells you what's inside is neither affordable nor accidentally advertised. I stepped into the main showroom, a vaulted chamber with polished wood floors, hanging brass lamps, and a hush so profound you could hear your own sense of inadequacy. Items were arranged on raised platforms behind velvet ropes, French clocks with too many cherubs, oil paintings of unsmiling women, and a glass case of snuff boxes that looked like they'd been rescued from Napoleon's sock drawer. At the front desk, a young woman with horn-rimmed glasses and a phone tucked between her shoulder and chin gave me a wary look. I gave her the smile I reserve for gatekeepers and IRS agents. Archie Goodwin. I'm here to speak with Miss Renfrew, if she's not too buried in objets d'art. The woman hesitated, glanced at a schedule on a clipboard, and gave me a slight nod. She's cataloguing in the rear gallery. I'll tell her you're coming." Moments later, I was ushered past a pair of roped-off alcoves into a smaller side room where the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and ambition. Tilda Renfrew was perched on a stool beside a long walnut table. She wore a camel hair jacket, black slacks, and a magnifying glass around her neck like a pendant. Her hair was iron grey, short and precise. She looked like she could tell the difference between imperial Chinese porcelain and a gas station souvenir with one sniff, and would prosecute the confusion personally. She rose and extended a hand. "Ms. Renfrew, you must be the associate Mr. Pope mentioned." "Indeed I am," I said, shaking. "Archie Goodwin. Private investigations, consultation, and assorted nuisance-making." She arched an eyebrow. "Sounds lively. It can be. I'd like to ask you a few questions about the jade box from the Pope estate." She didn't flinch, which told me something already. "A regrettable incident. You'll forgive me if I can't speculate." "Speculate freely, ma'am. I'll do the judging." She gave a dry little smile and sat. "It was a fine piece. Mid-Qing green-white nephrite, no embellishments. Simple, elegant, not rare, but with excellent patina. And where was it placed during preview?" "In Cabinet D, glass display, front hall. It was locked. Only staff have keys, and I triple-check. Every evening before closing. But it disappeared." She exhaled. "Yes, between day 1 and day 2. No broken glass, no missing lock keys. We reported it missing from the auction list, but not to the authorities. Per Mr. Pope's request, I nodded. "And what about its contents?" She hesitated. "I assumed it was empty." "That's not what Cedric Pope thinks." She gave a cool look. "He's given to dramatics." "Has he told you about the letters?" That stopped her. She looked away, then back. "He did, and frankly, I don't believe they were in the box." "Why not?" "Because Harold Pope wasn't sentimental. He was calculating, discreet, and ruthlessly practical. If those letters existed, and I'm not convinced, they were leverage, not romance. And he would not have kept leverage in a glass case. It was a good point. I gave her credit." "So what do you think happened?" "I think Cedric is using the box to stir mud. Possibly for inheritance reasons. Possibly for leverage of his own." "How about Martin Hale? Could he have taken it?" A flicker crossed her face. "He's ambitious, wants control of Belcroft. Was furious to learn Harold didn't include him in the will. But no, Martin's not clever enough for theft without drama. If he'd taken it, we'd be reading about it in a gossip column. And Thaddeus Pope? Now there's a snake in a velvet waistcoat," she said with a trace of admiration. "He fought Harold over everything, even parking spaces. But he's careful. If Thaddeus took the box, it's because he knew exactly what was in it, and what it could buy." That sounded like a man worth meeting. I made some polite remarks, left a card, and promised not to disturb her again until I did. Back in the main showroom, I noticed a slim, nervous figure scribbling notes near the sculpture platform. Horn-rimmed glasses, crisp shirt, and the posture of someone trying to not exist while existing in public. Martin Hale, assistant manager. Approached casually. "Excuse me, Mr. Hale." He jumped like I'd slapped a gong, then turned and tried to smile. "Yes?" "Archie Goodwin. Looking into the missing jade box. Mind if I ask a few questions?" He stiffened. "Hasn't that matter been dismissed?" "Not exactly, just pushed into more private hands." He hesitated. "I don't know much. I catalogued it myself the morning it arrived. After that, Miss Renfrew took over. And you saw it during preview?" "Yes. Day 1 only." "You think someone walked out with it?" He swallowed. I don't know. Could have been a mistake." "Misplaced. Misplacing a jade box inside a locked glass case is like misplacing a piano inside a mailbox," I said. "Doesn't happen," he fidgeted. I suppose not. Who had access that evening?" "Renfrew. Me. 2 junior clerks. The security guard. Oh, and Mr. Thaddeus came by. Late. I raised my eyebrows. Thaddeus Pope. Yes. Said. He wanted a private look. He's not on the staff, but no one stopped him. He's family. And you just let him in. I wasn't in charge of security. But you saw him. He nodded. Briefly, I was in the back. He said he was just passing through. And the next day, the box was gone. He looked away. I left the showroom a few minutes later, with more questions than answers, which meant things were going well. Wolfe doesn't consider it a proper morning unless at least one person has made a deliberate, clumsy attempt to sound innocent. Back at the brownstone, I delivered my findings, with a side of sarcasm and a dollop of suspicion. Wolfe listened in silence, sniffed the jade paperweight, and finally gave a grunt that meant he was at last engaged. So, I said, what's next? Wolfe stared at the paperweight as if it owed him money. Tomorrow you will visit Thaddeus. Pope, arrange an appointment. Use your charm. Should I take flowers or chloroform? Neither, he said. Take curiosity. And a recorder. I wish to hear every word. The man who entered Belcroft after hours had a reason. And you think Thaddeus took the box? I think, Wolfe said slowly, that if he didn't, he will wish he had once he realizes who did. He closed his eyes. Now go away, I must think, and orchids require silence. Thaddeus Pope lived exactly where I expected him to, on the 32nd floor of a glass and marble co-op overlooking Central Park, the kind of place that kept doormen in double-breasted uniforms and whose residents pretended to be modest by having decorators select their antiques. I'd called ahead, dropped Cedric's name, and let my voice carry just enough interest to sound like an ally and just enough ambiguity to keep him curious. The result, a 10 a.m. appointment and an invitation to have a word over scotch, which, even before lunch, was his idea of conversation starter and truth serum both. The doorman buzzed me in. Thaddeus's penthouse was a 2-story art gallery disguised as a home, filled with dark wood paneling, aggressive sculptures, and a smell that combined cedar, expensive cigars, and guarded entitlement. Thaddeus himself was waiting in a high-backed chair, wearing a velvet smoking jacket, the color of old claret, and a smile that had learned to survive 5 divorces and 2 SEC inquiries. Mr. Goodwin, he said, rising with elegance and precisely, no warmth. Cedric sent you, did he? Has he developed the good sense to hire professionals at last? That depends on the result, I said, shaking the hand he offered, a dry, well-moisturized thing that barely curled around mine. I'm here in a private capacity regarding your late father's estate. Ah, he gestured me toward a low chair near the window. The jade box nonsense. He poured us both a finger of something aged and scotch enough to shave the edges off morning. I took a sip, not a gulp. One does not offend fine liquor in this zip code. You've heard about the disappearance, I said. I have. And I must say it suits the old man's flair for the dramatic, leaving behind a mystery as one last performance. Except this one might have real consequences. He gave a casual shrug. To whom? To whoever took it. His smile never wavered. You think that's me? I leaned forward just slightly. You visited Belcroft the night it disappeared. Staff confirm it. You asked to inspect items alone. He chuckled. You sound just like the gossipy clerks in the back rooms. I was there, yes, but only to confirm that the auction items had not been tampered with. You see, Mr. Goodwin, I anticipated this kind of absurdity. My brother, pardon, my nephew, has always had a weakness for spectacle. Did you see the jade box? He swirled his glass and looked out at the skyline. I did. Lovely piece. But to my knowledge, it was still there when I left. Any chance someone else came in after? Not unless ghosts have gotten bolder. The place was locked when I left, and the night guard had already done his rounds. You have a key? He turned and met my eyes, cool as a bank vault. "No, but I do have influence, and influence, Mr. Goodwin, opens more doors than keys." That at least was honest. "What do you know about the contents?" I asked. He tilted his head. "Contents?" "Letters. Between Harold and Ivy Rainsford." The name landed like a splash in still water. Just a flicker, but it was there. The change in expression, the instant recalculation behind his eyes. "Ivy," he said slowly. "Now, there's a name from a forgotten shelf. I knew of her, of course. My father was careful, but not invisible." "So, you knew they were involved?" I suspected. One doesn't host the same dinner guest 39 times in a year without raising eyebrows. "Would those letters hurt you if they came to light?" He laughed, a short, brittle sound. "They wouldn't hurt me. They might embarrass certain others, those still active in society, with reputations built on illusion." "Anyone specific?" "If I named names, Mr. Goodwin, I'd need a fresh bottle and a libel lawyer on retainer." I stood. "Let me rephrase then. Did you take the box to keep those names protected or to use them?" He didn't answer immediately. He refilled his glass and took a long, slow sip. Then, finally, "I did not take the box. I wanted to. I thought about it. But I couldn't be sure the contents were genuine. And without certainty, the risk outweighed the reward." I believed him, not because he was sincere, he wasn't, but because he was calculating. A man like Thaddeus doesn't steal unless he knows exactly what he's stealing. "If you're not the thief," I said, "who would be?" He considered. "Tilda, perhaps, if she found out what was in it. Or Martin Hale, if he thought he could profit. Or even Cedric himself. Wouldn't that be delicious? The boy plays victim while pocketing the only card he has worth playing." I left shortly after, with the sense that Thaddeus Pope wasn't hiding a crime. He was waiting to see who committed it first. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe in the office, seated with a silk handkerchief folded just so across his lap. The jade paperweight was still on the desk, sitting in a patch of sunlight like an idol awaiting tribute. "He didn't do it," I said, dropping into my chair. "Too smart, too measured. He wanted the letters, but he wasn't sure they existed." "He's lying," Wolfe said. "About what?" "About certainty. If he knew Ivy Rainsford's name, he knew the stakes. He may not have taken the box, but he knows who did." "Then why not say?" "Because it still profits him to wait. Whoever has the box is exposed. Thaddeus prefers others to take the risk while he watches the reward ripen." I handed Wolfe my recorder, which he ignored. He prefers facts spoken, not replayed. Instead, I recounted the conversation with full detail. Wolfe listened, hands folded over his considerable girth. After a long silence, he said, "We must meet Ivy Rainsford. She's still alive. Check. If she is, she knows more than anyone. And if she isn't, her absence may explain much." "Want me to dig up her number?" "No," he said. "I want Saul Panzer." I blinked. "Serious stakes, huh?" "Mr. Panzer is discreet and thorough and fast." I made the call. 20 minutes later, Saul arrived. Neat suit, plain tie, and the face of a man who remembered every address, license plate, and grocery item in a 4-mile radius. Wolfe gave him the essentials in half the words it had taken me to deliver them. "Ivy Rainsford," Wolfe said. "Connected to Harold Pope, former society woman, status unknown. I want her located discreetly, and her current circumstances verified. Do not speak to her. Observe. Report." Saul nodded. "Done." He vanished, and silence returned. Wolfe leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. "You think she's the key?" "No," Wolfe murmured. "She's the fuse. The key is whoever is afraid of her letters, and we are about to find out who's afraid enough to act." It wasn't a threat, it wasn't a guess. It was a forecast. Because when Wolfe leans back like that and starts using metaphors, someone is about to make a mistake, and we were going to be there when they did. By the time Fritz rolled out lunch, duck liver pâté on toast points, a consommé, that could have been bottled and sold as Serenity, and a salad with pear vinaigrette. Wolfe had already retreated into the silence that often accompanied a turn in his thoughts. He ate with distracted grace, which meant he chewed but didn't savor, and he didn't comment once on the vinegar balance. For Wolfe, that was the equivalent of raising an eyebrow and shouting, "Eureka!" I, of course, compensated by enjoying the meal twice as hard. Someone had to honor Fritz's artistry, but between bites, I kept my ears open for Saul Panzer's return, because when Saul was out digging in the dirt, you could be sure he'd come back with something someone wished he hadn't found. The call came at 3:40. Fritz answered, vanished, down the hall and returned a moment later with a napkin folded precisely in half. "He is at the curb," Fritz said. "Mr. Panzer." "Show him in," Wolfe replied, wiping his lips with the same cloth Fritz had just delivered. Symbolic, maybe, or just convenience disguised as precision. Saul Panzer stepped into the office with his usual calm, like a librarian who knew where all the dead bodies were shelved. He dropped his hat on the rack and handed Wolfe a folded sheet of yellow paper, typed, single-spaced, clipped with a list of names and dates that looked like they'd been scraped off the backs of old invitation cards. "She's alive," Saul said simply. "Ivy Rainsford." "Where?" Wolfe asked, not opening the page yet. "Upper East Side, East 73rd Street. Buildings registered under a shell trust, but she's the occupant, retired, rarely leaves, lives alone, except for a private nurse who comes twice a week. No recent travel, no public statements in over a decade. She's off the grid but not underground. Condition? Frail. Quiet. I watched from the park side across the street. She's got age on her, pushing 80. Window plants, old lace. Curtains, the works." Wolfe opened the page finally and studied it in silence. "Any connections?" I asked. "Recent calls, visitors, mail?" Saul shrugged. "Nothing obvious. No lawyer visits in the last 6 months. The nurse, Angela Dre, is employed through a private firm. I've got their name. But here's the interesting bit." He pulled a second sheet from his jacket pocket. 6 weeks ago, there was a single courier delivery from a private sender. No return address. Envelope about 8 inches by 5, cream-colored gold seal. Signed for by the nurse. Rainsford. Herself didn't collect it. Courier service? Metro Prestige, Saul said. They keep logs. I paid the dispatcher a visit. The sender used a burner account. Cash paid, no ID required. But the driver remembers the drop-off. Said the man who delivered the envelope wore gloves, dark glasses, and a scarf over his mouth. It was early spring, not exactly ski weather. Wolfe grunted, which was his version of applause. "Someone sent her something anonymously," I said, "and that something maybe was a set of letters." "Possibly," Saul said, "or a warning." Wolfe turned to me. "You will visit Miss Rainsford tomorrow morning, no deception. Introduce yourself, present Mr. Pope's concern as it regards the auction, the missing box, and the possibility of forged or stolen correspondence. Do not mention the courier. Gauge her reaction. And if she slams the door in my face—" "She won't," Wolfe said. "She has kept silent for decades. That takes discipline, but discipline is not the same as disinterest." "Got it," I said. "Anything else?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "Observe her furnishings." Her furnishings. Her taste in chairs, books, the arrangement of objects. If the letters originated from her hand, their tone will reflect her temperament. Her environment may validate or contradict the character described in those letters. "You think Cedric made the letters up?" "I think Cedric has seen them," Wolfe said, "but he has not read them." Saul looked up. "Then who has?" Wolfe closed his eyes. "That," he said, "is the question that will lead to the jade box." After Saul left, Wolfe instructed me to review all known auction lists for the past 3 years from Belcroft, cross-referencing for repeat buyers, clients linked to either Harold Pope or the Rainsford family. I spent the next 2 hours at the desk flipping pages, digital and otherwise, and cursing the niche world of luxury antiquity, as if it personally offended me. When my eyes started twitching from scanning surnames, I paused and looked up. "Here's something," I said. 3 years ago, Belcroft sold a lacquered cabinet dated late Qing. Buyer listed as Ms. Ivy Rainsford, proxy bid, completed via Hale Management Trust. Hale? Wolfe's eyes opened. "Same last name as Martin Hale," I said. "Assistant manager. The guy Renfrew said wasn't clever enough for subtlety." Wolfe's tone flattened. "So he is clever enough to conceal a family connection. Curious. Call Belcroft. Confirm whether Martin Hale is related to the Hale Management Trust." I did. The receptionist at Belcroft, after being buttered and toasted with charm, confirmed it. Martin Hale was the trust's principal officer, named so on legal filings. When I asked her why she hadn't mentioned this before, she hesitated and said, "I assumed everyone already knew. It's not a secret." Which meant, of course, it was. I relayed all this to Wolfe, who didn't look surprised. So Martin Hale made a purchase on Ivy Rainsford's behalf. That puts him in direct contact with her, and now the jade box disappears under his watch. What's the play? Wolfe tapped the jade paperweight once with a single thick finger. Miss Rainsford wrote letters. Mr. Pope possessed them. Mr. Hale delivered antiques to Miss Rainsford. Therefore, Mr. Hale either discovered the letters during a prior transaction or delivered the very box that contained them. He may know what the letters contain, which puts him at risk, or in control, Wolfe said, depending on whether he has them now, or merely fears who does. "And Cedric?" I asked. "Still a pawn, but a noisy one." Wolfe waved. "Me off like a magician finishing a trick. Tomorrow, visit Miss Rainsford, charm her, but more importantly, listen. If she is the author, her words will betray her. And if she's not, then someone else has written a fiction," Wolfe said, "and we must discover who authored the lie." I left the office with a heavy coat, a lighter conscience, and one single instruction ringing in my head. Observe her furnishings. Because when Wolfe asks about your chairs, it usually means he's already figured out where the bodies are buried. There are few things in New York City as quietly intimidating as a well-preserved brownstone on East 73rd that manages to suggest both museum and mausoleum. Ivy Rainsford's residence was one of those places, the kind of home where time hadn't just stopped, but had taken off its shoes, drawn the curtains, and settled in for a long, formal nap. It was a crisp Thursday morning when I arrived, fresh-shaved, fresh-suited and freshly instructed to observe her furnishings. Not that Wolfe had elaborated. He rarely does when he's chewing on a theory. I was to determine if Ivy Rainsford had written those infamous letters, or if someone had forged her handwriting and sentiments to manipulate an entire inheritance squabble. Simple enough, right? The building's outer door clicked open after one buzz, and a woman in her mid-30s wearing a pale blue nurse's uniform and the practiced expression of someone who saw through visitors like window panes, let me in without a word. Her badge read Angela Dray. She gave me the once-over, then nodded toward the stairs. "She's waiting." "Don't upset her," she said flatly. "Wouldn't dream of it," I replied, stepping into the quiet. The sitting room on the second floor was steeped in filtered light, heavy drapery, and the scent of dried lavender. Antique furniture filled the space, but it wasn't there to impress. It was lived in, beloved. 2 Chippendale chairs scuffed at the legs, a Queen Anne settee whose brocade had faded into a memory, the narrow writing desk near the window, with ivory-handled pens and thick stationery, aligned with soldierly symmetry. Books lined the shelves, arranged by author, not color or height, a rarity among those who collect to be seen. Here was someone who read, and then there she was, Ivy Rainsford. She sat in a high-backed chair by the window, her figure draped in a navy shawl, hair a halo of silver pinned precisely. Her face was thin, drawn but dignified, cheekbones sharp as commentary, eyes like glassy marbles polished by decades of watching without speaking. "Mr. Goodwin," she said. Her voice was steady, almost imperious, like someone who hadn't asked permission for anything since Roosevelt was president. "That's me," I said, crossing the room and offering my hand. She didn't take it. Not rude, just deliberate. Like she knew exactly what courtesy cost. "May I sit?" She nodded. "Angela tells me you have questions. I don't mind, provided they don't bore me." I smiled. "That's mutual. Mind if I record?" "No, but I may refuse to answer." "Do continue." I clicked my pocket recorder, the one Wolfe insisted I carry whenever I was about to tread on ground he'd already mapped in his mind. Then I began. "I'm here about a jade box. It belonged to Harold Pope." Her lips tightened faintly. "Not a purse of grief. More like distaste. He's dead then. 3 weeks ago." She nodded. "He would have preferred something more theatrical. You knew him well?" "Well enough," she said. "He was clever. Lacked consistency in character, but not in charm. That's rare." "Did you exchange letters?" She didn't blink. "We corresponded. Occasionally. About personal matters. About ideas," she corrected. "And people. And power. Would you say the letters might cause discomfort to others?" Now she smiled, small, sly, sharp. "I suppose that depends on how they're read. And by whom? Are they yours?" I wrote to him. Yes, I do not, however, recall granting permission for those letters to be preserved in a jade box, let alone offered as posthumous ammunition. Her word choice confirmed Wolfe's theory. She hadn't sent the box. She hadn't even known it existed. Yet here we were with a missing container, a contested estate, and a bunch of people dancing around a pile of paper no one had actually read, except maybe one. "Do you have a copy of them?" "I do not." "Do you know who might?" She leaned back in the chair. "If Harold kept them and if he left them behind, then it was deliberate. He never preserved sentiment for its own sake. So, yes, he meant someone to find them, and perhaps someone else to bury them." "Could that someone be Cedric Pope?" Her expression didn't change. "Cedric is a boy playing a man's game with a counterfeit deck. I doubt he understands the value of those letters, let alone the risks." "So who does?" "I suspect you already know," she said, folding her hands in her lap. "Tell Mr. Wolfe this. If the letters are still at large, I suggest you find them before the person who has them decides to rewrite history." That was as clear an invitation as I was likely to get. I stood, offering a final glance around the room as instructed. The furnishings were Wolfe's target, and now I saw why. Everything here reflected restraint, nothing garish, nothing sentimental, and certainly nothing romantic. The woman in front of me didn't deal in florid language or nostalgic affection, which meant the letters, if they existed, were not syrupy declarations of love. They were something else. "I appreciate your time," I said. "So you've been helpful." She nodded once. "Do not send Cedric here. I dislike being used." I promised her I wouldn't, clicked off the recorder and left. Back at the brownstone, I reported in full. Wolfe listened with his eyes shut, only opening them once I'd described the writing desk and book collection. "She's a realist," he said. "Dry, acute, unsentimental. Therefore the letters were never love notes." "They were intelligence," I offered. "Observations. Political. Gossip. Character sketches. Leverage." He nodded. "And Harold Pope kept them not for affection but utility, which makes them dangerous." "Indeed, especially to someone like Thaddeus or Miss Renfrew. Both had stakes, both feared exposure, but only one had access and foresight. You think Renfrew took them? She catalogued the estate, she oversaw the placement, she knew the box's location, and she likely knew its weight, its balance, perhaps even its true contents. I sat forward. Then why hasn't she used them? Because she doesn't know what's inside. She knows only what Cedric claimed. And in such cases, ignorance can be more dangerous than possession. I rubbed my forehead. So we still don't know who has them? No, Wolfe said, but we know who doesn't. Cedric, Ivy, Thaddeus, possibly even Hale. They circle the box like moths around a matchstick. But someone lit it. Wolfe nodded. And the smoke will draw our culprit out. How? Tomorrow, he said, rising, rare for him at this hour. We bait the hook. Who's the bait? He looked at me like it was obvious. You, of course. Great. Of all the people to dangle before a thief in a cage of velvet and deceit, it always came back to me. The charming one? Being bait isn't glamorous. People think it means dressing sharp and playing suave, while villains flock to your scent, like moths to a well-lit martini. But in truth, being bait means walking into a room full of suspects with nothing but a smile, a wire, and a prayer that your boss knows what he's doing. And when your boss is Nero Wolfe, that prayer isn't for your safety, it's for your patience. It was Friday, late morning, and Wolfe had decided it was time to stir the pot. We were no closer to locating the missing jade box, or the letters, that supposedly nestled inside it, like dynamite in a dollhouse. What we did have was a parade of suspects with overlapping motives, inconsistent stories, and increasingly brittle alibis. So Wolfe, in his usual armchair general fashion, gave the order, draw them out, apply pressure. Let them sweat, which is how I found myself back at Belcroft Auction House, standing beneath a chandelier that looked like it had crushed more ambition than gravity ever could. I was there with Wolfe's blessing to casually question the staff, stir up rumors, and imply, without saying anything outright, that we were close to recovering something very valuable. Subtle panic was the goal. The first person I approached was Martin Hale. He was hunched over a catalogue ledger behind the reception desk, a pencil tucked behind his ear like he actually used it. I gave him a warm grin. "Morning, Martin." He looked up, startled. "Oh, Mr. Goodwin, again? I'm like a bad penny. And you know what they say about pennies. Eventually they reveal something." He attempted a smile. It didn't stick. "Wolfe wanted me to check in," I said. "We've made progress, narrowed the suspects. You might see some movement soon, might even recover the missing item." His eyes flickered. "Really?" "Mm-hmm. The jade box may have been spotted. Anonymous tip. Someone matching a description. Very familiar." He paled slightly. That's good news, I suppose." I leaned in, lowering my voice. "You didn't mention you were connected to the Hale Management Trust. That seems like something a guy in your position wouldn't forget to tell me." He bristled. "It's just a business name, tax structure. I helped Miss Rainsford make a purchase once, years ago. No crime in that." "Not unless you're helping her now." He hesitated. "Too long." Then, "I haven't seen her in ages." "Funny," I said. "She remembers you fondly, said you delivered the cabinet yourself." He looked down at the ledger. "Is that all?" "Depends," I said. "Do you know what was in the jade box?" "No." "You sure?" His voice rose slightly. I said no. I never opened it, never touched it. I let that sit, then tapped the desk. "Okay, let's call this a friendly heads-up." I moved on. Next was Tilda Renfrew. I found her in the back room, inspecting a stack of early Georgian silver with a jeweler's loop and the disdain of a woman forced to babysit lesser metal. She didn't look up as I approached. "Miss Renfrew, Mr. Goodwin still chasing phantoms?" "Maybe, or maybe I've just cornered one." She raised an eyebrow, still not looking at me. Congratulations. Ivy Rainsford remembers everything, including you. Said Harold Pope trusted you more than his own family, called you his confidant. At that the loop dropped an inch. Did he? I smiled. And she said the letters weren't romantic. They were strategic, observations, intel, political skeletons, kind of material a smart woman like you might want out of circulation. She turned then, slowly, like a glacier reorienting. If I had taken those letters, Mr. Goodwin, I would not be standing here. I'd be retired, in Portugal, with a dog. That's oddly specific. I've had time to think, she said. The box vanished under my watch, yes, and I should have secured it better. But if you think I risked my entire career for something I never read, you overestimate my desperation, or underestimate your planning. That earned me a sharp glance, then a dismissive wave. Go bother Cedric, he's the one who keeps circling like a vulture with amnesia. That was a fair point, so I did. I found Cedric Pope exactly where I expected, Belcroft's lounge, sipping mineral water and trying to look like he owned the place. He had traded tweed for navy linen and carried a leather folio that screamed, "I'm important," though the contents probably included no more than a dry-cleaning receipt and a headache. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, as I slid into the armchair opposite, "have you recovered the letters?" "Not yet, but we're circling closer. It's amazing how people react when they know the fuse is lit." He leaned forward. "So someone has them?" "Maybe. Maybe they're trying to sell them, or maybe they're just holding on, waiting for the highest bidder." "I should have destroyed them," Cedric muttered. "Ah," I said, "so you have read them." He froze, then recovered. "No, I meant if I'd found them, hypothetically." "Sure, hypothetically." I stood. "We'll be in touch." That was the round. 3 conversations, 3 reactions, 1 rising. Tension. I returned to the brownstone just past noon, where Wolfe was already seated behind his desk, fingers templed beneath his chin. "Report," he said. I gave it to him in sequence: Martin's stammer, Tilda's glacial composure, Cedric's accidental admission. When I finished, Wolfe opened his eyes. "One of them has made a mistake." "Which one?" "We'll find out tonight," Wolfe said. "We are ready." "Ready for what?" "For the gathering," he said. "The confrontation, the resolution." "You're calling them all in?" "Indeed." 6:30, office. You will make the calls." I paused. "Isn't it early for that? We still don't have the box." Wolfe's gaze narrowed. "No, but I know who does." He leaned back in his chair with a grunt of finality. "And tonight, so will they." By 5:30 that evening, the brownstone had the atmosphere of a stage just before the curtain rises, quiet, charged and crowded, with invisible lines that were about to intersect. Fritz had sealed off the dining room and retired to the kitchen with a promise not to let so much as a ladle clink. Wolfe had closed the orchid rooms an hour early and was now seated in his office chair with the solemnity of a judge preparing for a hanging. And I? I had made 5 phone calls, issued 5 invitations, and now stood by the front window with my eye on the sidewalk, watching the dominoes arrive. First was Cedric Pope, predictably early and overdressed, clutching that same leather folio, like it contained the Ark of the Covenant. He looked jumpy, nervous eyes, collar too tight, hands in constant fidget. I showed him in and offered him the red leather chair by the windows. He accepted without comment. Next came Tilda Renfrew, punctual to the second. She wore charcoal slacks and a blouse of some smoky silk that could have cost $300 or $30. I couldn't tell, and didn't want to guess. She gave me a nod that was more gesture than greeting, and sat near the bookshelves, where she promptly crossed her legs and took out a small notepad. Professional to the last. Martin Hale arrived third, precisely 6 minutes late, with a sheepish look and the distinct scent of someone who'd applied cologne to cover up something else. Stress, sweat, maybe guilt. He avoided eye contact, and hovered near the door until I nudged him toward the empty armchair across from Cedric. Thaddeus Pope arrived fourth, uninvited but expected. He didn't wait for the bell. He walked in as if the house belonged to him. I opened the door mid-knock. He smirked. "I assumed I was on the list, Archie. Wolfe may be many things, but he isn't stupid." "You're right," I said. "He's not." He strolled in, placed his gloves in his pocket, and settled on the edge of the sofa like a panther testing furniture. Last was Saul Panzer, strictly observing from the hallway under Wolfe's orders. He didn't enter, but I knew he'd be watching, through the crack in the parlor door, ready to intervene should anything get heated. Not that I expected fisticuffs. Wolfe's office had a way of civilizing even the nastiest souls. Like being in a church where the God you're praying to is logical deduction, and nobody leaves without a benediction. At exactly 6:30, Wolfe looked up. "Thank you all for coming," he said, in that slow, precise voice that sounds like it was stirred in a marble bowl. "You are here because an item of considerable significance has gone missing. You are all suspects, and I will be frank. The jade box will be recovered tonight, either voluntarily or by implication." There was a collective shift of discomfort. No one spoke. "I shall begin with a simple premise," Wolfe continued. "The letters inside the box are real. They were written by Ivy Rainsford, a woman whose discretion is both legendary and carefully preserved. They do not speak of romance, but of scandal, observations of those in high society, some now deceased, others very much alive." He paused. "These letters were valuable not for what they meant to Harold Pope, but for what they could do to others. That made them dangerous." Still no response. Wolfe pressed on. "Miss Renfrew," he said, turning his gaze to her. "You catalogued the box. Did you inspect its contents?" "No," she said evenly. "It was sealed when I received it." "Yet you were the only one who handled its placement." "Correct, but I never opened it, nor had reason to." "You had motive. If the letters reflected on clients of Belcroft, past or present, your professional integrity might be damaged. Auction houses thrive on confidentiality." She frowned but said nothing. "Mr. Hale," Wolfe said, swinging his attention like a pendulum, "you have a connection to Ms. Rainsford. You helped her acquire antiques through your own trust. You visited her more than once." Martin blinked rapidly. "That was years ago, a single delivery." "False," Wolfe said. "You visited her at least 4 times in the last year. Saul Panzer verified it. She may have been your confidant. Your employer or your relative, it's immaterial. You knew of the letters, and that knowledge threatened your position." Martin looked like a man suddenly aware of gravity. "I didn't take the box," he said. "I knew about it, I suspected what was in it, but I didn't take it." Wolfe gave him no more than a flicker of attention. He turned to Cedric. "Mr. Pope, you claimed the box was present during preview and vanished the next day, but you failed to mention that you had opened it once before cataloging began, using your grandfather's desk key." Cedric stiffened. "That's not who told you that." "You did," Wolfe said coldly. "Your phrasing, your timelines, your insistence that the box was locked in the glass case, not simply stored. Only someone who had tested its security could know that." Cedric's mouth opened and shut. "You read the letters," Wolfe said. "You did not understand their significance, but you knew they were delicate. You used them as leverage, hoping someone would pay to keep them hidden." "That's a lie." "It is not," Wolfe said, and raised his voice just a touch. Enough to press everyone an inch deeper into their chairs. "But it is not the crime we are here to settle." Everyone was silent. Then Wolfe turned his gaze, finally, to Thaddeus Pope. "You visited Belcroft the night the box vanished. Staff confirmed. You stayed longer than you admitted. And though you claim to have seen the box intact, you never mentioned which cabinet it was in. Why?" Thaddeus smiled. "You already know, don't you?" "I do," Wolfe said, and then, You didn't steal the box, but you discovered it was missing, and you said nothing. You hoped suspicion would fall on Cedric or Renfrew or anyone else, but you didn't take the letters because you already had what you needed. Thaddeus laughed quietly. And what, pray, do you think I needed? Control, Wolfe said. Not over the estate, but over the narrative. He let that hang for a moment. The letters are not gone. They were never in the box during preview. The box was swapped earlier, emptied, and replaced. He turned once more, and now everyone was looking at Wolfe like the ceiling might collapse. The box, he said, was taken by someone who believed the letters would be misused. Someone who respected Harold Pope enough to protect what he left behind. Wolfe's gaze landed on Tilda Renfrew, and this time she didn't look away. I took the box, she said simply. Cedric inhaled sharply. You... What? You stole it? No, she said. I preserved it. She reached into her handbag and produced a wrapped parcel, a square jade-green bundle the size of a jewelry box. Wolfe did not rise. He simply nodded. Why? I asked. Because the letters were too volatile, she said. I read them weeks before the auction began. I suspected what they were. When Cedric began asking about them, I knew what he intended. Leverage, manipulation. His grandfather left him power he didn't understand. She laid the box on Wolfe's desk. I hid them until I could decide what to do. I've decided. And? That is? Wolfe asked. She looked at him calmly. Give them to Miss Rainsford. Let her decide whether to burn them. Wolfe nodded once. I agree. And just like that, the room exhaled. Cedric looked deflated. Martin avoided everyone's eyes. Thaddeus gave a quiet smirk that said he'd expected as much. And I? I watched the real thief walk away with dignity, and Wolfe once again win the war without ever leaving his chair. Dinner that night was roast quail with tarragon glaze. And silence. But as Wolfe reached for his wine, he offered a final comment. Power should be kept, he said, not brandished. And I, as usual, had no better line than that to end the day. By Saturday morning, the storm had passed, but in Nero Wolfe's world, post-confrontation calm isn't about relief. It's about re-evaluation. The case was, technically, closed. The jade box had been returned, the letters preserved, and the false narratives laid bare in Wolfe's office with the finality of a curtain drop. Yet Wolfe had not, as was his custom, declared himself satisfied. Instead, he sat brooding in his chair, chewing over the leftovers, not the roast quail Fritz had sent up to the kitchen, but the moral and intellectual remains of a case that had concluded with more silence than satisfaction. I entered the office just after 10 with two things, a hot cup of Fritz's blend and a thin manila envelope addressed in old-fashioned cursive. Wolfe didn't move when I set the coffee on its coaster, but when I laid the envelope atop the jade paperweight on his desk, he opened his eyes. What is that? He asked. A delivery. Special courier. No return name, but it came from East 73rd. You'll notice the handwriting matches Ivy Rainsford's stationery from her desk. Wolfe leaned forward, not eagerly, not urgently, but with the sort of deliberate curiosity that could surgically dismantle a politician in 5 words. He opened the envelope, pulled out a single folded sheet, and read, twice. Then he handed it to me. Mr. Wolfe, you were right. The letters do not belong to any of them, nor strictly do they belong to me. They are observation, not ownership, commentary, not confession. I have chosen to destroy them, not from fear, but from understanding. What we observe shapes us, yes, but it also entraps us. Let them be unwritten. Miss Renfrew acted with clarity, you with restraint. That is rare. I thank you. I read it again. No flourish, no apology, just a decision, delivered. In neat, unmistakable script. She burned them, I said. Yes, Wolfe replied. And wisely. You're not disappointed? He shook his head. Not in the outcome, only in the waste of what might have been an extraordinary document. I raised an eyebrow. You think they were that revealing? Possibly, but more. Likely insightful. Ivy Rainsford is not the sort to record trysts or trivialities. She observed power, its misuse, its holders. To read those letters would have been to eavesdrop on the architecture of influence in this city. Sounds like you regret not reading them. I regret nothing, Wolfe said. I never had them. Which, in Wolfe's peculiar moral compass, made all the difference. I moved to my desk, flipping through notes while Wolfe stared at the now empty jade paperweight, like it still held the shadows of what was once inside. So, I said after a while, we should file this under what? Espionage by correspondence. The ethics of unmailed leverage. Betrayal, Wolfe said. Deferred but not denied. That was cryptic even by Wolfe standards, so I waited. He continued, more to himself than me. Cedric attempted to weaponize. Something he didn't understand. Thaddeus sought to let the damage occur. Renfrew interceded, yes, but also withheld. Martin Hale lied by omission. Only Rainsford acted with clarity, and even she waited until prompted. I leaned back in my chair. Meaning? Meaning, he said, that none of them were innocent. They merely failed to sin effectively. Wow, I said. That's almost theological. No, he corrected. It's human. I let that stew. At noon, Saul Panzer stopped by with one final detail. The courier log from Metro Prestige confirmed that the mysterious envelope sent to Ivy Rainsford 6 weeks ago had been arranged by someone calling from a Belcroft extension. He couldn't pinpoint the line exactly, but the call originated from the front office during lunch hours when Hale was manning the desk. Saul laid the file on Wolfe's desk. You want me to dig further? Wolfe shook his head. No need. The action speaks. Saul nodded and left. I watched Wolfe for a moment, then said, So Hale tried to warn her? Yes, Wolfe replied. Or perhaps to protect her. A final gesture before the scramble began. So why lie when I asked him about it? Because he wanted credit without consequence. Cowardice by discretion. I filed that under Wolfe's Moral Evaluations, Volume 37. The rest of the day passed slowly. Fritz served an early supper, braised lamb, saffron rice, spiced carrots, and Wolfe complimented the seasoning, which in our world was akin to a standing ovation. After the plates were cleared, we returned to the office for cigars, mine unlit, his symbolic, and I finally asked the question that had been sitting at the edge of my thoughts since the night before. Why didn't you press charges? Wolfe looked at me sharply. Because, he said, there was no crime. Renfrew stole the box. No, he corrected. She intercepted it, preserved it, and returned it with honesty. That is not theft, that is stewardship. Cedric lied. Thaddeus manipulated, Hale concealed. Yes, Wolfe said, and they were exposed, publicly, among peers. That is punishment. But no one paid. On the contrary, Wolfe said, swirling the last sip of his burgundy, they all paid, just not in currency you can deposit. I considered that while the clock ticked and the shadows deepened across the carpet. Wolfe had his feet planted flat, eyes closed, hands resting on his stomach like a philosopher at recess. So, I said finally, what would you have done if you had read the letters? Wolfe opened one eye, framed them, or burned them, depending on their quality and their danger. Archie, he said, everything worth reading is dangerous. That was his last word on the matter. And as I turned out the office lights an hour later, leaving the brownstone in its usual quiet dignity, I couldn't help but feel that this case hadn't closed. It had simply folded itself back into the key, world like the letters themselves, vanished but not forgotten. Tomorrow would bring another client, another story, But for tonight there was only the sound of New York outside the windows, and the thought of a woman alone in a room, watching old pages burn in silence. Justice, perhaps, or something close enough. It's funny the way a case lingers, not in the facts, but in the aftertaste. Some stories end with a bang, a handcuff or a signature on the last page of a deposition. Others don't end at all, not really. They dissolve into memory, trailing implications like cigar smoke curling above a cold fireplace. The jade box, the letters, the maneuverings at Belcroft. By the time Sunday rolled in, none of it was on the front page. No scandal broke, no legacy collapsed, but something had shifted beneath the surface, and I knew it would echo in small, invisible ways for a long time. Wolfe didn't talk about the case again, which, if you know Nero Wolfe, means he was still thinking about it. He spent most of Sunday in the plant rooms, checking root rot and muttering Latin names like they owed him money. I kept to the office, filing notes and finalizing transcripts. Fritz, out of kindness or instinct, made apple tartlets in the afternoon and left one for me beside the typewriter. It tasted like closure, or at least something sweet enough to fake it. By dusk the house had returned to normal. The phone didn't ring, the walls were still, and the only sound was the scratch of Wolfe's Mont Blanc against cream paper as he penned his weekly letter to Lewis Hewitt, likely on the care of Masdevallia orchids or some floricultural triumph Wolfe would never let the city's air ruin. And then at 6:42 precisely, the bell rang. Not the phone. The front door. Wolfe looked up from his letter, brow arching like a drawbridge. I was already halfway there. The woman who stood on our stoop looked like she'd stepped from a different decade, elegance pressed into every inch, from her silk gloves to the netted hat that cast shadows across her face. She wasn't young, but she had the kind of poise that made age irrelevant. When she spoke, it was as if the city paused to listen. "Mr. Goodwin?" she asked. I nodded. "That's me." She offered a faint smile. "My name is Angela Dray." Recognition clicked. The nurse. Ivy Rainsford's caretaker. Except she didn't look like a nurse today. She looked like someone with a burden. Ivy. "Rainsford passed away this morning," she said. I stood very still, peacefully, she added, in her sleep. I didn't speak right away. Instead, I stepped aside and gestured toward the office. Wolfe didn't rise when she entered, but his gaze sharpened. She gave a respectful nod. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "forgive the intrusion." "You are not intruding," he said. "Please." She sat folding her hands in her lap. She asked me to come. "In the event of her death, there is something I'm meant to give you." From her bag, she pulled out a sealed envelope. Not handwritten this time, but typed. She handed it to Wolfe. Without flourish, she said you would understand. Wolfe took the envelope, studied it for a moment, then broke the seal. I watched his eyes move line by line, his lips neither curling nor tightening, just absorbing. When he finished, he handed the letter to me without a word. "Mr. Wolfe, by the time you read this, I will have left the world in which these letters once held weight. I chose to destroy them not out of fear, but resolve. But one piece I retained, a page Harold wrote, not I. He was not always a man of clarity, but this he got right. I return it to you in trust. You may do with it as you will. It no longer matters to the world, but it might still matter to you. I.R." Folded inside the letter was a single sheet of paper, aged, faintly brittle at the corners. Wolfe opened it carefully. I read it over his shoulder. It wasn't a confession, it was a list of names: Thaddeus Pope, 2 trustees, 3 politicians, 1 newspaper magnate, and beneath it, in Harold Pope's hand, "These men bury more than secrets. Protect the letters." until such time as they can no longer wound. Wolfe refolded the paper and replaced it in the envelope. His face was unreadable. Angela Dray stood. "I don't know what it means," she said, "but she insisted you see it." "You were her nurse," Wolfe said, "but also her confidant." Dray smiled faintly. "I kept her alive. And then I kept her secrets." "That," Wolfe said, "is a finer legacy than most." She inclined her head and left without another word. I closed the door behind her and returned to the office. Wolfe was still staring at the sealed envelope. "You think this list is dangerous?" I asked. "No," he said. "It was." He tapped the page gently. "These men are dead. Their ghosts remain. But the world has changed. So why hold on to it?" "Because the purpose of a secret is not always to conceal," Wolfe said. "Sometimes it is to understand." And there it was. The real reason Wolfe took the case. Not the jade box, not Cedric's paranoia, not even the auction house's prestige. It was the pursuit of understanding, how people wield power, how they fold truth into paper, and how they decide when to let it burn. I stepped to the window and looked out at the city. It was still humming, still selfish, still full of people chasing or hiding from the things they couldn't explain. Behind me, Wolfe stood, slowly, carefully, and walked to the safe behind the bookshelves. He placed the envelope inside. Not to bury it, to remember. That night we dined on poached salmon and endive. No one spoke for several minutes. Then, as Fritz cleared the plates, Wolfe said quietly, "The most dangerous truths are the ones no longer needed." I nodded, letting the words settle. "And the most valuable?" I asked. He looked at me, just once. "The ones no one suspects exist." That was the end. Not of the case, but of its weight. And as I turned off the lights in the office one last time, I knew that somewhere in Wolfe's safe, beneath layers of cigar ash, orchid catalogues, and silence, lay a piece of history, unclaimed, unpublished, but known. A good case never leaves you the moment it ends. It trails after you like the faintest trace of cologne, persistent, nostalgic, hard to name. The kind of thing that catches you off guard while tying your shoes or buttering toast. And though Wolfe had declared the matter of the jade box finished, I could tell it hadn't quite left his mind. There were signs. Wolfe hadn't returned to his orchids the next morning. That in itself was a thunderclap. He remained in the office, seated at his desk with a cup of oolong gone cold. The envelope with Ivy Rainsford's final letter and Harold Pope's handwritten list hadn't yet been replaced in the safe. It lay just to his right, like an unopened book he was still debating whether to read again. I let him be. I know Wolfe well enough to understand that his silences are rarely voids, their frameworks being built from the inside. When he doesn't speak, he's rearranging the furniture in his head. I spent the morning sorting through our case files. I could have closed the folder titled Crooked Auction House, added a summary, and tucked it in the green cabinet under P for Pope, but something about it made me linger. We'd encountered no crime in the traditional sense, no body, no blood, no stolen diamonds or murdered colonels. But it had been, in Wolfe's words, a theft of intent, a near heist of perception and memory. At 11:15 the phone rang. I answered, hoping for something trivial, a wrong number or a grocery delivery gone astray. Instead, I heard the velvet grit of Thaddeus Pope. "Mr. Goodwin," he said. "A brief word. Brief is our favorite flavor. Go ahead. I want to know if your employer intends to release any statement." "To the press," I smirked. "About what? That a private collection remained private?" "There are interpretations of the incident, suggestions of impropriety, of mishandling." "I'm sure there are," I said, "and I'm equally sure those interpretations depend on who's doing the interpreting. But no, Wolfe has no intention of speaking to the press." Thaddeus exhaled. Good, for everyone's sake. Before he could hang up, I added, You knew what was in those letters. You didn't need to read them. You were one of the names, weren't you? There was a pause, then, "Good day, Mr. Goodwin." Click. I smiled. One more confirmation. One more line in Wolfe's internal ledger. When I returned to the office, Wolfe still hadn't moved. The envelope remained untouched. His fingers rested on the arms of the chair, lightly curled, as if he were cradling invisible weights. "Ivy Rainsford died with peace," he said softly. I blinked. It wasn't a question. She did, I confirmed. She destroyed the letters, but left the names. She trusted you with them. "No," Wolfe said. "She trusted herself to be known by the right man." "High praise," I said. "Rare accuracy," he replied. He finally picked up the envelope and turned it over. Not to reopen it. He didn't need to. He already knew every name, every line, every intention, but holding it was an act of continuity, a bridge between what had been hidden and what now only lingered as potential. I took a seat. "So, what now?" He glanced at me. "Now," he said, "we maintain silence." I nodded slowly. "That won't be easy. Belcroft's already brushing things under the rug. Cedric will come sniffing around again. He has the resilience of mildew. He will not find purchase," Wolfe said. "He has no leverage left. And Thaddeus? He will whisper to lawyers and insinuate to reporters, but without scandal. To fan the flame will sputter." I looked at the safe. "Are you really going to keep it?" "Yes." "Why?" Wolfe's gaze shifted to the bay windows, where the light filtered through the blinds in pale gold stripes. Outside, a car horn honked. A dog barked. Life, unbothered by moral intricacies, marched on. "Because the past is never entirely dead," he said, "and the names we remember can shape the mistakes we avoid." That sounds like philosophy. "It is," he admitted, "but so is justice. And justice requires memory." We sat in silence for a few moments. Then Wolfe reached for the small brass key in his desk drawer, stood, grunting slightly, and walked to the bookshelf. He turned the latch that opened the hidden compartment. The safe was old but immaculate, built into the wood like a steel heart. He opened it, placed the envelope inside, and locked it with care. And then he turned to me. "This case was not about guilt," he said. "It was about restraint. Every person involved could have done harm. Most didn't. That's rarer than you think." I shrugged. "You're giving them more credit than I would." "No," he said. "I am giving them exactly the credit they earned." That afternoon I called Belcroft, not for follow-up, just to check. Martin Hale had submitted his resignation, citing family reasons. Tilda Renfrew remained in place, her authority reinforced by the quiet rumor that she had prevented a very large mess from becoming public. Cedric Pope, I was told, had returned to Europe and to reflect, according to the polite phrasing, and Thaddeus Pope, naturally, was nowhere to be found. My guess, Palm Beach or court. I reported this to Wolfe. "Then equilibrium has returned," he said, "such as it is." That night, Fritz prepared duck à l'orange, his silent tribute to the first meal served when Cedric Pope walked through our door with sweaty palms and a missing heirloom. The food tasted better now, not because the case was over, but because it had ended without bitterness. That doesn't happen often. Wolfe raised his glass during the meal. "Not in toast, but as acknowledgement. To fidelity," he said. "I matched him. To silence," I replied. He approved. After dinner, I returned to the office to shut down the day. I gathered the notes, the file, the statements. As I closed the drawer, I glanced once more at the safe behind the bookshelf. It was closed, of course, locked, silent, but I knew what it held, not just a list of names or a dying woman's letter, or the memory of a box etched in jade. It held trust, earned, not given. And for all Wolfe's bombast and ritual, that was the one thing he never misplaces. The brownstone returned to its usual rhythms. Fritz cleared the dishes. Wolfe retired to his orchids, and I, as always, typed the final note into the casebook. No crime charged, no law broken, no evidence tampered. And yet, justice served, silently and completely. Case concluded, but never quite closed. The city continued outside. Cars passed, lights dimmed, shadows lengthened, and somewhere in the vast hush between stories, a secret remained where it belonged, unspoken but not forgotten.